Here are three of the most disturbing, true, breakdown horror stories. I don't tell this story often. People either don't believe me or they don't want to. But I know what happened. I lived it. It was late, well past midnight, when I found myself on a stretch of deserted highway, miles from the nearest town. I had been driving home from my sister's place, a 4-hour trip that I had stupidly delayed until after dinner. My gas light had come on about 20 minutes earlier, and I had been hoping to make it to the next town before I needed to stop. Then, out of nowhere, the car sputtered and died. Just like that. I coasted onto the shoulder, cursing myself for not stopping sooner. The road was empty, dark, and silent, except for the occasional rustle of wind in the trees. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course. I sat there for a while, hoping maybe a car would pass, but nothing. Just the long, empty road stretching in both directions, disappearing into the night. After what felt like an hour, but was probably 10 minutes, I decided to start walking. There had to be a gas station or a house somewhere nearby. The night air was cold, and the crunch of my boots on the gravel was the only sound. The deeper I walked into the darkness, the more isolated I felt. Every shadow seemed to move. Every whisper of wind felt like breath on my neck. That's when I saw it. A dim light in the distance, flickering like a candle. As I got closer, I saw that it wasn't a house or a gas station, but an old RV parked just off the road, half hidden by overgrown weeds. The headlights were off, but the small interior light cast a dull glow through the stained curtains. I hesitated. Something about the RV felt wrong. Abandoned, maybe. Or worse. But I needed help. I knocked on the door. "Hello?" Silence. I knocked again. A faint creak came from inside, like someone shifting their weight. My skin prickled. "Sorry to bother you," I called, forcing my voice to stay even. "My car broke down up the road. I just need to borrow a phone or get some gas if you have any." Another creak. Then, slowly, the door cracked open. A man peered out. Stringy, greasy hair. Hollow eyes sunken into his pale face. He looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. "Car trouble?" His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in days. "That's too bad." He smiled, but there was something off about it. Too wide, too forced. I took a small step back. "Yeah, you got a phone I could use?" The man tilted his head, considering. "Nah, no phone." My stomach twisted. "Any gas?" "Maybe. Why don't you come inside?" Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to turn and leave. But I was stranded, and he was my only chance at getting out of there. I hesitated too long. The door swung open, and he stepped aside. "Come on in." The air inside was thick with the smell of sweat and something rotten. The place was a mess. Old food containers, dirty clothes, empty beer bottles scattered everywhere. A stained mattress lay on the floor in the corner, and next to it, a rusty toolbox sat half open. I tried to keep my voice casual. "You live here?" The man shrugged. "For now." I shifted uncomfortably. "So, the gas?" He pointed to the back. "Got a canister out there, I'll grab it." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. As he turned, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner. Something small and shiny poking out from under a pile of dirty rags. A set of car keys. A lot of them. My blood ran cold. I looked closer. Underneath the keys, barely visible, in the dim light, was a purse. A woman's purse. And beside it, a phone. A phone with a shattered screen, smeared with something dark. I needed to leave. The man was still rummaging in the back. I took a step toward the door, trying to move quietly. My fingers brushed the handle when... "Leaving so soon?" I spun around. He stood there holding a large wrench, his grip tight. My heart hammered in my chest. Actually, I think I'll just walk. His smile widened. Nah, it's dangerous out there. I didn't wait. I lunged for the door, yanking it open. He grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron, nails digging into my skin. I fought, kicking, twisting, but he was strong. Too strong. He yanked me back inside and slammed the door shut. Shouldn't have come here, he murmured. I struggled, my hand fumbling for anything to use as a weapon. My fingers closed around an empty beer bottle. I swung, smashing it against his head. He let out a guttural cry, stumbling back. Blood trickled down his face, and his expression twisted with rage. I didn't think. I ran. Out the door, into the night, sprinting down the road. Behind me, I heard him cursing, footsteps pounding against the gravel as he gave chase. My lungs burned, my legs ached. I pushed forward, praying for headlights, for a passing car, anything. Then, in the distance, salvation lights. A truck was approaching, its high beams cutting through the darkness. I ran straight into the road, waving frantically. The truck screeched to a halt. The driver, a gruff-looking man in his 50s, jumped out. "What the hell? Please, help me," I gasped. "That guy, I trailed off. The road behind me was empty. The driver looked me up and down, my torn sleeve, my scraped hands. "Get in." I didn't argue. I climbed into the truck, locking the door behind me. The driver pulled away, glancing in the rearview mirror. "You okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't. My body was trembling. My mind raced with what could have happened if I hadn't seen those keys, that purse, if I hadn't run when I did. We reached a gas station 20 minutes later. The driver waited while I called the police. They went back to check the RV. It was gone. No trace of the man, no sign it had ever been there. But I know what I saw, and I know this. I never drive that road at night anymore, and I never, ever stop for help. I've never been the kind of person who believes in fate, but that night made me reconsider. It was past midnight, and I was driving home from a weekend with some old college friends. The route was mostly back roads, long stretches of asphalt flanked by thick woods. My GPS had died a while back, but I knew I was less than an hour from home. That's when I saw it, my gas gauge dipping dangerously close to empty. I cursed under my breath. A few miles later, my headlights caught the flickering neon of a rundown gas station. It was the kind of place you'd expect to see in an old horror movie. One rusty pump, a single-story building with grimy windows, and no sign of another soul. But I didn't have much of a choice. I pulled up to the pump and got out. The air was thick with humidity, and the distant sound of crickets filled the silence. I tried the pump. Nothing. The screen was dark. "Figures," I muttered. I approached the small shop, peering through the grimy glass door. A dim bulb flickered inside, barely illuminating the cluttered shelves. There was an old man behind the counter, his face shadowed by the brim of a trucker cap. He didn't look up when I entered. "Pump's not working," I said. Still, he didn't look up. "Cash only," he muttered. I dug into my wallet. I had about $20. "How much can I get for this?" He finally looked at me. His eyes were small, dark, unreadable, enough to get you where you're going. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I nodded, sliding the money onto the counter. He took it without a word and handed me an old metal key on a chain. "Storage tank's round back. Gotta fill it yourself." I stared at him. "You're serious?" His lips barely moved when he said, Take it or leave it. I exhaled sharply and grabbed the key. Walking out, I noticed something. There was a car parked at the far end of the lot. It was old, maybe from the 70s, and covered in dust. More unsettling was the fact that its driver's side door was slightly ajar. I shook it off. Not my problem. Around back, the storage tank sat beside a row of rusted barrels. The air smelled of oil and decay. I found the pump and slid the key into the lock, turning it until I heard a click. A low creak sounded behind me. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head. A man stood just at the edge of the darkness. He was tall, too thin, his clothes loose like they belonged to someone else. His face was obscured by shadow, but his eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Need help?" His voice was dry, cracked. I gripped the nozzle tighter. "Number, I'm good." He stepped closer. "Station's closed. You shouldn't be here." A bead of sweat slid down my back. Owner gave me the key. Just getting gas. He tilted his head, considering. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the station. I exhaled shakily and started pumping the gas. Every nerve in my body was on high alert. I just needed to fill up and get the hell out of there. As the tank filled, I risked a glance toward the shop. The old man behind the counter was staring at me now, his expression unreadable. The strange man was nowhere in sight. I put the nozzle back and turned toward my car, moving quickly. That's when I heard it. A scraping sound. Metal on metal. It was coming from the parked car at the end of the lot. The one with the open door. Something moved inside it. I stopped. A figure was slumped in the driver's seat. Pale. Unmoving. A woman. Her face was turned away, but her arm dangled limply out of the car. Her fingers twitched. I took a step forward, my breath hitching. "Hey!" A hand clamped over my mouth. Cold, bony fingers dug into my face as an arm wrapped around my throat, yanking me backward. Panic exploded in my chest. I kicked, struggled, but the grip was iron tight. My attacker dragged me toward the back of the station, toward the darkness. "Shouldn't have stopped," he whispered against my ear. "Should have kept driving." I slammed my elbow into his ribs, hard. He grunted, his grip loosening just enough for me to twist free. I stumbled, gasping, and spun around. It was the man from earlier. His face was gaunt, skin stretched too tight over sharp cheekbones. His eyes were wide, frenzied, and in his hand, a knife. I bolted. I didn't think. I just ran, sprinting for my car, yanking the door handle. Locked. My hands fumbled for my keys, shaking, as footsteps pounded behind me. I got the door open just as he lunged. I threw myself inside and slammed it shut. He hit the window with a dull thud, the blade of his knife scraping against the glass. I jammed the key into the ignition, twisting frantically. The engine sputtered. "No, no, no." It roared to life. I slammed on the gas, tires screeching as I peeled out of the lot. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, breathing hard, watching me go. And behind him, in the shop window, the old man was still watching too. I didn't stop until I reached the next town. I pulled into a brightly lit gas station and locked my doors, hands shaking as I called the police. They went back to investigate. The station was abandoned. No sign of the old man. No sign of the attacker. No car. No woman. But they found something else. Buried behind the shop, in the dirt and weeds, rows of shallow graves, some of them fresh. I still don't know what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away that night, if I hadn't fought back. But I do know this. Never stop at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, and never, ever go around back. I don't usually like talking about this night. When I do, I get that look. The one that says people think I'm exaggerating, or worse, lying. But I know what happened. It was real. I was driving home late from a work trip, somewhere along Highway 29. It was one of those long stretches of road where the darkness seems thicker, where your high beams barely make a dent in the void ahead. I should have stopped hours earlier, but I was only an hour from home and I figured I could push through. Then my car sputtered. I felt the loss of power before the warning lights even came on. The steering got stiff and the engine gave a weak, choking sound before going completely silent. I coasted to the shoulder, my hazard lights blinking against the endless blackness of the road. I tried the ignition. Nothing. I sighed and grabbed my phone. No service. A single car passed by in the opposite direction, its taillights vanishing in seconds. Other than that, I was alone. I thought about waiting in the car until morning, but then I saw a faint glow ahead. Just off the road, maybe a quarter mile away, was a house. An old farmhouse, from the looks of it. I didn't want to walk in the dark, but what choice did I have? The path leading to the house was lined with overgrown grass and patches of dirt. The closer I got, the more details emerged. The sagging porch, the shutters barely hanging onto their hinges, the way the windows reflected nothing but blackness. Still, someone had left a porch light on. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. The door creaked open. Inside, the house smelled musty, like damp wood and something faintly metallic. The hallway stretched ahead, dark and narrow, with old-fashioned wallpaper peeling at the edges. I stepped inside, hesitating as the door groaned behind me, slowly drifting shut on its own. "Hello?" My voice sounded small, uncertain. A noise, faint, but definitely there, came from deeper in the house. Footsteps. I stepped further in, just past the threshold. "I had a breakdown on the road," I called out. "I just need to use a phone." Silence. Then, from down the hall, a low voice. "Come in." Every instinct screamed at me to turn and leave, but something in my brain convinced me that I was just being paranoid. Maybe an old man lived here, hard of hearing. Maybe he was just waking up. I took a few hesitant steps forward. At the end of the hall, the kitchen light flickered on. The bulb was dim and yellow, casting long shadows over the scratched-up table and mismatched chairs. A single chair was pulled away from the table, as though someone had been sitting there just moments before. A man stood nearby. He was tall and thin, dressed in an old work shirt and jeans, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. His face was pale, his eyes set deep in his skull. He looked at me for a long time before finally speaking. "Phone's in there." He nodded toward a room off to the side. I hesitated. Something about his voice felt off, like he was forcing it to sound normal. "Thanks," I said, moving toward the room he indicated. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, my stomach twisted. It was a storage room, but there was no phone. Just a small cot pushed against the wall, a bucket in the corner, and a set of chains bolted to the floor. A frayed rope dangled from a rusted hook above the cot. The walls had scratches, deep and uneven, as if someone had clawed at them. Before I could react, I heard movement behind me. I spun just as the man lunged. I ducked out of instinct, his hand grazing my shoulder instead of grabbing it outright. I staggered back into the room, my heart slamming against my ribs. He blocked the doorway, his mouth curling into a grin. "I knew someone would come eventually," he murmured. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the nearest object, a rusted wrench off a shelf, and swung. It connected with his arm, and he let out a grunt, stumbling back. I bolted past him, shoving him aside with everything I had. I ran. I sprinted down the hall, past the peeling wallpaper, past the front door swinging on its rusted hinges. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just ran straight to my car. The man followed. I could hear him, his feet pounding the ground, his breath ragged. He was fast, too fast. I threw myself inside the car and hit the lock button just as he reached the window. His hand slapped the glass, his face inches from mine. The key. I fumbled for it, my hands shaking, my breath coming in shallow gasps. He pounded on the window again, harder this time. Then he grinned at me, wide and knowing, as though he'd seen this play out before. The key slid into the ignition. I turned it. The engine sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. I slammed the car into drive and hit the gas. The tires spun against the gravel before finally catching, launching the car forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw him still standing there, watching, his face contorted in something between rage and amusement. I didn't stop. I drove until I reached a gas station nearly 20 miles away. When I finally got cell service, I called the police. They searched the property, found the chains, the cot, found something else too, clothes, belongings, evidence that I wasn't the first person to stop there. But they never found him. That house was abandoned. No sign that anyone had lived there for years. No explanation for why the porch light had been on, or why fresh footprints were found leading away from the house, disappearing into the woods. I still see his face in my dreams sometimes. If my car had broken down just a few miles later, I might have made it home that night. And if I'd hesitated just a second longer in that house, I might never have made it out at all.